The chandeliers glittered like constellations above the ballroom of Melvin Khalifa's Banana Island mansion. Music pulsed through the air, champagne flutes clinked, and laughter rose over the shuffle of heels across polished marble floors. The air smelled of roasted beef skewers and imported wine. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, Melvin's 30th birthday, a landmark in his rise from a small-time dreamer to one of Lagos's most envied tech moguls. Juliet Faderson drifted through the crowd, her sequined gown catching the light as she balanced a tray of drinks. Not because she was a server, but because she had arranged everything: the catering, the staff, the decor, the guest list. She knew the rhythms of Melvin's world better than anyone. Yet as she smiled politely, offering glasses to colleagues, investors, and strangers, she felt a hollow tightness pressing against her chest. She was his wife, but here she might as well have been invisible. A group of men near the bar chuckled. One leaned in, his voice pitched just enough for Juliet to hear. "She's too traditional for him. Look at her. She doesn't even fit in." Juliet kept walking, her jaw tightening. She had learned long ago not to flinch at the casual cruelties people spoke when they thought she couldn't hear. But as she turned, her heel caught on the edge of a rug. She stumbled forward, trying to steady herself. And that was when Melvin stretched out his foot, subtle but deliberate. Her body hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. Gasps sliced through the air. Before she could rise, a sharp kick landed against her side. Not accidental, not clumsy, intentional. "She's just lazy and clumsy," Melvin announced with a smirk, sipping his champagne as though nothing had happened. "Now you all see what I deal with every day." The laughter came, hesitant at first, then bolder from a few guests eager to stay on his good side. Juliet's palms burned from the fall, her ribs ached from the kick, but it was the sting of humiliation that cut deepest. She looked around. Not a single hand reached down to help her. Not from the friends, not from the colleagues, not even from the wide-eyed receptionist from his office, who should never have been invited to their home in the first place. Juliet pushed herself up slowly. She smoothed her gown, lifted her chin, and walked out of the hall with as much dignity as her trembling legs could muster. She did not cry, not here, not in front of them. But she memorized every face that had laughed, every one that had turned away. That night, when the last car left and the music faded, she locked herself in the bathroom. Sitting on the cold tiles, knees pulled to her chest, she finally allowed the tears to come. Her body throbbed with pain, but her heart was splintered into pieces. How had they gotten here? Just a few years ago, she would have sworn Melvin Khalifa would never hurt her. They met in the narrow aisles of a second-hand bookstore in Surrey. Juliet had been juggling her aunt's struggling food delivery business, surviving on late nights and unpaid invoices, yet still carried a light in her eyes. Melvin was hunched over a worn laptop, scribbling ideas into a notebook. He was broke then, but unshakably ambitious. His dream was to build a gaming app, something he promised would change the way people connected. At first, their conversations were shy, clumsy exchanges about books and music. But soon, he was waiting outside her office just to walk her to the bus stop. He sent her long messages at night, filled with dreams and gratitude. He never asked for anything. He just listened. Juliet had never met a man like him. When he finally shared his app idea, she had leaned forward, eyes shining. "You can do it," she told him. And when her father passed a few months later, leaving her a 10 million naira inheritance, she didn't hesitate. She invested half into Melvin's dream. "You're not just funding me," he whispered, glassy-eyed as he clutched her hands. "You're building our future." 8 months later, they married in a small but intimate ceremony under the warm Lagos sun. Juliet wore a cream lace gown, her heart brimming with hope. She thought she had found her forever. The early days were chaotic but sweet. They worked side by side at a plastic table in their tiny apartment, eating cold rice while drafting investor emails. Juliet convinced her aunt to use their drivers to help with early promotions. She tested the app late into the night, correcting bugs, offering suggestions. Slowly, the app, PlayZone, took off. A few YouTubers reviewed it. A tech blog featured it. Within a year, it was trending in universities across Lagos. The apartment upgraded. So did Melvin's suits. He bought a car, then hired staff, then leased an office in Lekki. With each success, his world expanded. But Juliet's world grew smaller. "Let's divide roles," he told her one evening, not as a request, but as a command. "I'll handle the business accounts. You just focus on being my queen." It had sounded sweet then, but the sweetness came with invisible chains. Juliet handled the house, the bills, even errands for his staff. Whenever she asked about finances, he rolled his eyes. "You wouldn't understand. Just trust me." At first, she thought she was being too sensitive, but the lipstick stains on his collars, the perfume on his shirts, the late nights explained as meetings told her otherwise. Still, she silenced her doubts, thinking marriage would change him, that success would soften him. She wanted to believe in the man she had met in the bookstore, the man who once waited at bus stops. But the man she saw at his 30th birthday, the man who kicked her in front of investors and friends, was not that man. Juliet rose from the bathroom floor as dawn broke, her reflection in the mirror hollow-eyed but steady. She realized something. Melvin had not climbed to the top alone. He had climbed on her shoulders. She had been the ladder, and tomorrow she would stop holding him up. When Melvin swaggered into the kitchen that morning, whistling as though nothing had happened, Juliet barely looked up from her tea. He didn't notice. He never did. But while he hummed and texted on his phone, Juliet's mind was racing. She remembered the folder tucked in the back of their closet, the one with business registrations, property deeds, and bank papers. Documents she had kept neatly filed away. And she remembered that every one of those papers bore her name. The house they lived in, the business license for Playzone, even the car registered through her late father's trust. He thought he owned it all, but in truth, he had built his empire on borrowed ground, on her ground. That night, as he slept soundly upstairs, Juliet sat at the dining table with the documents spread before her. Property titles, tax forms, bank statements. She read each carefully, her pen tracing the words. Her lips pressed into a thin, determined line. For the first time in years, she felt power in her hands. Not the power of shouting or crying, but the quiet, unstoppable power of truth written in ink. Melvin Khalifa thought the party humiliation had broken her. He was wrong. It had awakened her. By the time the sun rose, Juliet had drafted her first plan. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't beg. She would take everything back, piece by piece, legally, silently, without warning. And when Melvin finally realized it would already be too late, Juliet Faderson rose the next morning with a steadiness that surprised even her. Her ribs still ached from the kick, and her cheek burned faintly where his hand had landed. But the deeper wound, the humiliation, had hardened into something sharper than pain. Resolve. The house was unusually quiet. Melvin Khalifa was already gone, likely strutting into his Lekki office, with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the world. Juliet lingered in the kitchen, sipping her tea, staring at the neat stack of documents she had retrieved from their bedroom closet the night before. The folder lay before her, thick with years of paperwork. She spread everything across the dining table. Property deeds, company registration papers, bank statements, tax receipts, even the finance agreement for his prized Mercedes. She examined each page carefully, like a detective piecing together evidence at a crime scene. And with each signature, each date, her breath slowed. The house was hers. The business registration, Playzone Technologies, bore her name as co-founder. Even the corporate account linked back to her late father's trust. Melvin had insisted years ago that he handle the finances, that it was simpler that way, and she had let him. But she had never signed away her ownership. Melvin thought he built an empire. He didn't realize the foundation still belonged to her. Juliet dialed her cousin Henry, who worked in finance. He picked up on the second ring. "Juliet, it's been forever. You sound serious." "I need a favor," she said softly, steadying her voice. Confidential. Can you recommend someone at City Edge Bank who handles business accounts? Someone discreet. There was a pause. Henry lowered his voice. Is this about Melvin? Juliet closed her eyes briefly. Yes, but don't ask questions. Just send me the contact. By noon, she was seated in a polished office across from a bespectacled bank manager who treated her with quiet respect. She handed him her identification, along with the business documents. His brows lifted as he scanned them. Mrs. Faderson, you are the principal signatory on these accounts. Her chest tightened. Meaning your husband cannot make financial decisions without your approval. If you choose, we can restrict his access entirely. You would have full control. Juliet's hand trembled as she signed the order. By evening, Melvin's access to every linked account had been frozen. The next step came 2 days later. Juliet returned home with a locksmith in tow. By then, Melvin had begun to notice the first cracks in his empire. His card had been declined at a luxury boutique. His call to the bank had ended in confusion. He stormed into the house that night, demanding answers. What the hell is going on, Juliet? My card was declined today. Do you know how humiliating that was? She stirred her tea calmly. Maybe you should ask the bank. He stared at her as though she had spoken a foreign language. Then he laughed bitterly. You're joking. This is just some mistake. I'll sort it out tomorrow. He brushed past her, still texting furiously on his phone, oblivious to the quiet smirk tugging at her lips. The locksmith arrived the next morning while Melvin was at work. The gates, the front door, even the security code to the alarm system, everything was reset. The Wi-Fi password was changed, the remotes reprogrammed. By the time the sun dipped behind the lagoon, Juliet held in her hands the keys to her own freedom. But she knew locks and frozen cards were only the beginning. She needed something bigger, protection that would last. So she made her way to a sleek office on Victoria Island, where Susan Cross, one of the city's sharpest attorneys, welcomed her in. Mrs. Faderson, Susan said, motioning to the chair opposite her. I've read through your email. I'll be frank, you've been more thorough than most clients I've ever had. These documents alone, she tapped the file Juliet slid across the table, give you leverage Melvin can't contest. Juliet clasped her hands. I'm not trying to ruin him for sport, but I need to protect myself. He thinks everything belongs to him. Susan adjusted her glasses, her tone calm but firm. The house deed is in your name. The company license lists you as majority shareholder. Even his car was financed through your late father's trust. Legally, you own it all. If you want, I can draft the paperwork to remove him as signatory on every corporate account, quietly, permanently. For the first time in weeks, Juliet exhaled a shaky breath. Do it. That weekend, Melvin swaggered into the living room wearing one of his designer shirts, phone glued to his ear. Juliet watched from the staircase as he barked orders at someone, an assistant, perhaps, or another woman. When he noticed her, he waved the phone like a weapon. Do you know what's happening? The bank says I can't access my own accounts. My name is being removed from business files. Juliet, this is sabotage. She descended the stairs slowly, her face unreadable. No, Melvin, this is ownership. Mine. He blinked, stunned. Then his grin returned, arrogant and dismissive. You think freezing accounts makes you powerful? Sweetheart, I am the face of Playzone. Investors call me, not you. Without me, there is nothing. Juliet tilted her head slightly. Then maybe you should explain why every property deed, every tax record, and every license has my signature. You've been living on borrowed power, Melvin, and I'm done lending it. For a moment, his smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, scoffing. This is a tantrum. You'll calm down. You always do. But Juliet didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply turned, walked back upstairs, and closed the door behind her. She knew the silence would eat at him more than words ever could. That night, as Melvin sat in his office across town, trying to reassure investors with a smile that felt tighter than usual, Juliet sat in her bedroom, her laptop glowing faintly against the darkness. Email by email, she began reclaiming her life. She contacted utility companies, suppliers, and even the corporate landlord. Every contract, every subscription, every signature, she shifted back into her own name. By midnight, the fortress Melvin believed he controlled was already shifting under his feet. When he finally called her past midnight, his voice was sharp with frustration. "Juliet, did you do this? Tell me you didn't." She listened quietly, then ended the call without a word. Lying back against her pillow, she realized something. The humiliation at his birthday party had been a breaking point, yes, but what she felt now wasn't just anger. It was clarity. Melvin Khalifa had mistaken her silence for weakness. He had forgotten who built the foundation he stood on. And now, piece by piece, she was taking it all back. The horn blared outside the Banana Island mansion, long and furious. Juliet Faderson stood at the upstairs window, arms folded, as Melvin Khalifa stepped out of his sedan. His jaw was clenched, sunglasses perched low, phone lit like a weapon in his hand. He pressed the intercom. "Open the gate." Juliet didn't move. The security feed showed him in sharp clarity. Half-buttoned shirt, arrogance pouring off him. "Juliet," his voice crackled, "I'm not playing games. You changed the locks? You froze accounts? Don't provoke me." "You don't live here anymore," she replied calmly. He gave a sharp laugh. "This house exists because of me." "It exists because of documents," she said. "Everyone has my name." His smile faltered. He stepped closer to the gate. "Open it, or I'll climb over." "Try," she said, and disconnected. He hammered the bell, then hurled a stone at the gate light. It shattered, plunging the courtyard into shadow. Juliet stepped out onto the veranda, framed by porch lamps. "Breaking fixtures won't change deeds," she said evenly. Neighbors peeked from balconies. A guard at the next compound stopped pretending not to notice. "You'll regret this," Melvin hissed. "I regret the years I gave you," Juliet answered. "Tonight, I collect interest." For a moment, his mask slipped. Then he spat a curse, stormed back into the car, and sped away. Silence fell, broken only by the night breeze. Juliet's phone buzzed. "Are you safe?" It was her aunt, Victoria Lane, the woman who had once insisted Juliet keep her name on every document. "Ah, safe," Juliet typed back, "and grateful for your advice." "Tomorrow," Aunt Victoria replied, "we start packing his things." Juliet allowed herself a tired smile. The house finally felt clear. By morning, the scene was everywhere. A neighbor's balcony camera had captured Melvin shouting, throwing the stone, and being denied entry. A gossip blog posted it with the caption, "Tech Golden Boy locked out by wife." Comments split, then tilted. Old photos resurfaced. Juliet's bruised cheek from the party, footage of her fall, his smug grin. Doubt, once her prison, began to shift toward him. At noon, Melvin arrived at Playzone headquarters in Lekki, fury disguised under a thin smile. He rehearsed his excuse in the elevator. Unreasonable wife, sabotage, misunderstanding. His keycard flashed red at the turnstile. "Glitch," he muttered to the receptionist. "It's disabled," she said gently. "Per authorization." "My authorization." "The owner's," she corrected. He froze. "Get security." Two guards approached, polite but firm. "We're to escort non-authorized visitors." "I built this place," he snapped, heat crawling up his neck. "Every desk, every server, every client exists because of me." A voice floated from the mezzanine. "And every license sits under my signature." Juliet descended the stairs in a navy dress, a folder under her arm. The lobby went silent. "Remove him," she instructed. "You can't," he started. "Corporate registry," she said, handing the folder to the guard. "Ownership schedule. Board resolution executed this morning. Counsel is Susan Cross." Employees, engineers, managers, accountants watched openly. Melvin's throat tightened. "You're making a scene," he hissed. "No," Juliet said. "You made a scene when you kicked me. This is administration." The guards walked beside him toward the exit. At the threshold, he turned. "You'll need me for the investors' call at 4. At 4, Juliet replied coolly, we'll show audited numbers. Investors prefer facts to charisma. A laugh escaped from somewhere in the crowd. Shame burned his neck as he stormed out. Within the hour, Juliet gathered staff in the lounge. No microphone, no theatrics, just a whiteboard. First, she began, payroll is secure. Second, vendor arrears will be cleared in tranches. Legal has prioritized essentials. Third, we're launching a whistleblower inbox. Anonymous, encrypted. If you were pressured to misreport data, use it. Protection is guaranteed. A hand lifted nervously. Are our emails being monitored? Because last quarter... Stop, Juliet interrupted gently. Don't incriminate yourself here. Send it to counsel today. Heads nodded. The room's stiffness melted into cautious relief. Juliet wrote 3 words on the board. Clarity, compliance, culture. My mistake, she admitted, voice steady, was staying silent, mistaking silence for loyalty. The company paid for that. It won't again. Applause began softly, then filled the lounge. That afternoon, a tech journalist tweeted a thread about shareholder rights, quoting filings that showed Juliet had always been majority owner. Screenshots of her calm confrontation at the office spread online. Captions read, not vengeful, not hysterical, just prepared. Melvin went live on social media, eyes reddened, voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. He spoke of betrayal, of a wife turned enemy, of men punished for ambition. At first, sympathy poured in, but then came the questions. Where were your hands when she fell? Why is every asset in her name? Why is your keycard disabled? By the end, the tide had turned. He closed the app in defeat. That evening, boxes filled the foyer. Aunt Victoria arrived with tape, labels, and brisk tenderness. I brought bubble wrap, she said, for trophies he never truly earned. Juliet managed a small smile. Thank you for being here. Where else would I be? Aunt Victoria cupped Juliet's cheek carefully, avoiding the fading bruise. You're not hard because you're cruel. You're steel because you were refined. They packed together, clothes folded, gadgets cataloged, photographs face down. With every sealed box, Juliet felt another chain snap free. Do you feel guilty? Aunt Victoria asked quietly. Juliet paused, sealing a carton. No, I feel lighter. Angry at the girl I used to be, maybe. But mostly I feel busy, and it helps. Grief has a cousin named Order, her aunt said. Keep them both. They stacked the last box by the door. Juliet arranged a courier to deliver them to the motel where Melvin was rumored to be staying. The irony didn't thrill her, but it closed a chapter. At the door, Aunt Victoria paused. He'll try again. Men who mistake affection for access always do. Let him, Juliet said. I'm done negotiating with storms. Aunt Victoria kissed her forehead. Then sleep. Tomorrow you build. That night, Juliet drafted an email to investors. Subject, governance, stability, next steps, no flourishes, just dates, filings, audit calendar, whistleblower policy, and new procurement controls. She attached registries and confirmations, then ended with a vow. Leadership isn't a photograph, it's a ledger. Ours balances now. She hit send. Outside, the lagoon moved with its steady rhythm. Inside, the house stood firm around her. Juliet poured herself tea, cradling the warmth in her hands. Somewhere across town, Melvin rehearsed a story that helped him sleep. Here, Juliet filed proof, labeled boxes, and rebuilt a company's backbone. Between them stretched the sharp line where love had ended and governance had begun. She turned off the lights and went upstairs, not triumphant, not afraid, just aligned. The clash had found its balance. His noise outside the gate, her signatures inside the vault. Tomorrow she would unlock her own office door and work. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. Juliet Faderson sat on the bench outside the hearing room, file balanced on her lap, her lawyer Susan Cross beside her. She wasn't trembling anymore. The woman who once wept quietly in bathrooms was gone. This Juliet waited with her back straight, her documents neatly tabbed and her silence steady. A shadow crossed the corridor. Juliet looked up and saw a tall, elegant woman approach. Her heels clicked softly against the tile floor, her silk suit whispering authority. She carried no briefcase, just a designer bag tucked close. Her lips were painted a sharp red, but her eyes, steady, unflinching, were what caught Juliet. "You don't know me," the woman said quietly, stopping just a few feet away. "But my name is Sandra Cole, and I think we need to talk." Susan leaned forward, wary. "And what business do you have with my client?" Sandra's voice was calm. "I was with Melvin for 9 months." Juliet's breath hitched, but she didn't flinch. The woman's expression held no malice, no gloating, only a sober honesty. "He told me you were unstable," Sandra continued, "that the marriage was over, that he only stayed because he pitied you. He said you ruined his business and that he lost everything cleaning up your mistakes." Susan exhaled sharply through her nose. Juliet pressed her palms together to keep from trembling. Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Last week I discovered the truth," she said. "I hired a private investigator. He dug deeper than I could on my own. And everything he found leads back here. To you." Juliet hesitated, then accepted the folder. Inside were screenshots of bank transfers, voice notes, and photographs, receipts that showed Melvin had been using Sandra's accounts for nearly a year. He had borrowed under the guise of urgent business and fabricated emergencies, then laughed about it in messages to friends. "He used me," Sandra said, her jaw tight, "manipulated me, and when I pressed him, he turned cruel. He didn't just lie to you, Mrs. Faderson. He defrauded me." Juliet closed the folder, her eyes steady now. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Sandra's lips twitched into something like relief. "Then maybe we should stop being his victims separately. Maybe we should end this together." That evening, in Susan's Victoria Island office, Sandra sat across from Juliet at the long table while Susan reviewed the evidence. The glow from the desk lamp illuminated the papers spread like puzzle pieces. "This changes everything," Susan said, tapping a receipt. "What we were preparing was a divorce case. With this, we have financial fraud, misrepresentation, abuse of trust." She turned to Juliet. "If Sandra is willing to testify, we can expand the case and bring criminal charges." Sandra's hands tightened around her glass of water. "I'll testify. He needs to be stopped." For the first time in days, Juliet allowed herself to meet Sandra's eyes fully. They were not rivals here. They were soldiers standing on the same battlefield, bound not by affection for Melvin, but by the scars he had left. Juliet extended a hand slowly across the table. "Then let's end him." Sandra clasped it firmly. Over the next week, Sandra and Juliet met almost daily in Susan's office. Each time, Sandra arrived with more evidence. Voice recordings of late-night calls where Melvin wept theatrically for money, emails where he promised repayment, bank transfers that vanished into shell accounts. "He told me he was paying developers overseas," Sandra said one afternoon, sliding a USB stick across the desk. "Turns out half of these accounts don't even exist." Juliet leaned forward, scanning the files. Her stomach tightened, not with shock anymore, but with recognition. She had seen the same patterns when she once questioned him years ago. His dismissive sighs, his rolling eyes, his sharp words meant to make her doubt herself. Susan pieced everything together meticulously. "He has a pattern," she explained. "He selects women with resources. He convinces them he needs temporary help, plays on their empathy, then drains what he can. The moment they resist, he pivots, insults them, gaslights them, moves on. Classic manipulation. Classic fraud." Sandra's voice cracked slightly. "I lost millions, but the worst part? I believed him. I believed I was the only one who could fix him." Juliet's hand found hers across the table briefly. "So did I." The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of shared betrayal. Melvin, unaware of the alliance forming against him, tried to patch his public image. He posted videos from hotel rooms, portraying himself as a man abandoned by a cruel wife. He spoke of modern women who love money more than love, and of being stripped of his empire by a greedy partner. At first, the sympathy flowed in, but Sandra's investigator leaked pieces of evidence online. Screenshots of his voice notes, records of his fraud, even a snippet of him mocking Juliet after the birthday party. Public opinion began to splinter. Blogs that once praised him now questioned his integrity. Investors quietly withdrew interest. One headline read, "Khalifa Empire Built on Lies? Documents suggest so." Juliet didn't rejoice. She didn't need to. The tide was turning without her raising her voice. One evening, Susan gathered both women in her office for a strategy session. The city lights glittered through the wide windows as she laid out the plan. Step 1, we expand the case. Divorce is no longer the headline, fraud is. Step 2, we filed a freeze not just business accounts, but any personal accounts connected to the transfers. Step 3, we bring in law enforcement. With both of you as witnesses and hard evidence, he won't wriggle free. Sandra nodded firmly. Juliet did too. Susan leaned back, her eyes narrowing. He will retaliate. Expect late-night calls, public smears, maybe even intimidation. Don't engage, don't reply. Every word you say can be twisted. Let me and the evidence speak for you. Juliet's jaw set. I've been silent for years. Now silence is my weapon. Sandra smiled faintly. Then he's already lost. The following day, Juliet and Sandra met at a quiet cafe in Victoria Island. The atmosphere was casual, but their conversation was anything but. Sandra placed her phone on the table. He's already contacting another woman. Young, naive. He'll start the same cycle with her. Juliet's stomach sank. How long before she ends up like us? Sandra's eyes were cold now. Not if we end him first. They raised their coffee cups, a silent toast. Not to vengeance, but to justice. That night, Juliet returned home to the mansion. The rooms were quieter than ever, but they no longer felt hollow. They felt like a fortress being rebuilt, brick by her own hands. She sat at the dining table, reviewing Susan's draft motions, and thought about the girl she had once been. The girl who believed silence was loyalty. No more. Melvin Khalifa had made enemies of women who once loved him, and together they were about to dismantle the empire he thought would protect him. The legal war wasn't just coming, it had already begun. The courthouse steps were a battlefield before the doors even opened. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, flashes igniting the gray morning like lightning. Reporters leaned over barricades, their voices tumbling over one another. Juliet, is it true you locked him out? Mr. Khalifa, did she steal your company? Are you prepared to lose everything? Juliet Faderson adjusted her scarf and kept walking, her lawyer Susan Cross flanking her with calm precision. She didn't break stride, didn't look at the swarm. This moment wasn't for the cameras. It was for the truth. Melvin Khalifa arrived minutes later, cutting through the chaos with the arrogance of a man still clinging to his own myth. He wore a crisp blue suit and a self-assured smile, but his eyes betrayed the cracks, bloodshot, restless. He stopped at the microphones. My wife, he said, voice soft and theatrical, was once my everything. I built her up when no one else would. And now she's tearing me down for greed. But I still love her. The crowd buzzed, some sympathetic, others skeptical. Juliet didn't respond. She simply walked past and entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, called the session to order. Case 478, Khalifa versus Faderson. Parties may proceed. Melvin's lawyer rose first, speaking of betrayal and ambition. My client, a self-made man, is being stripped of his empire by a vindictive spouse. She seeks to destroy his legacy, leaving him with nothing. Susan Cross stood calmly once he finished. Your Honor, this case is not about vindictiveness. It is about ownership, fraud, and abuse. And today, the evidence will speak louder than any performance. Melvin took the stand first. He spoke with practiced charm, weaving stories of sleepless nights coding apps, of carrying Juliet on his back through their early struggles. He painted her as an envious wife who couldn't handle his success. I worked while she complained. I dreamed while she doubted. Everything I have, I earned. His voice cracked at the right moments. He wiped his eyes theatrically. Social media buzzed in real time. Clips of his testimony spread with captions. A husband betrayed. Sympathy swelled until Susan rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Khalifa," she began, holding up a paper. "Can you explain why the property deed of the house you claim to own lists Juliet Faderson as the sole proprietor?" Melvin blinked. We shared everything. That's how marriage works." "Shared?" Susan's tone was surgical. "Then why is your name absent on every official record? Would you also like to explain why Playzone Technologies, your supposed creation, lists Juliet as the majority shareholder since incorporation?" He shifted. "That was temporary paperwork." Susan slid a new document across the stand. "Is this also temporary? A wire transfer from company funds to a personal account labeled entertainment expenses, cross-referenced with receipts for luxury handbags, purchased for your mistress." Gasps echoed through the room. Melvin's mouth opened, closed. "No further questions," Susan said crisply. Then it was Juliet's turn. She didn't take the stand dramatically. She walked calmly, placed her hand on the oath, and sat. Susan guided her gently. "Mrs. Faderson, what role did you play in Playzone's creation?" Juliet spoke steadily. "I invested half of my inheritance. I tested the app at night, handled investor emails, and even used my family's business drivers to help with early promotions. Every milestone, I was there." Susan nodded. "Did you ever sign over ownership?" "Never." "Did your husband ever physically harm you?" Juliet hesitated, then reached for a file. She handed it to the bailiff. "These are photographs taken after his 30th birthday party. I was kicked in public and slapped at a corporate event. The images appeared on the screen. The bruise on her cheek, the scrape on her arm. The silence in the courtroom was deafening." Melvin muttered under his breath, "She's exaggerating." Susan's voice cut like a blade. "Exhibit C, a video recorded by a guest. Mr. Khalifa laughing after striking his wife, calling her lazy and clumsy." The video played. Gasps again. Even the judge's brows furrowed. "And finally," Susan said, "evidence from Miss Sandra Cole, another victim of Mr. Khalifa's fraud. Bank transfers, voice recordings, and receipts showing he manipulated her into funding his personal lifestyle." Sandra, seated in the gallery, rose and identified herself. "Every word is true, Your Honor." The courtroom rippled with whispers. Melvin's lawyer tried to object, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that Juliet was orchestrating a smear campaign. But Susan anticipated every move. "Circumstantial," she repeated, lifting her hand. "Then explain this. CCTV footage of Mr. Khalifa breaking into Juliet's home weeks ago, footage that went viral." The video rolled. Melvin scaling the fence, smashing a window, screaming her name until police arrived. The judge's gavel banged. "Order!" Melvin leapt up. "She provoked me. She ruined me." "Sit down, Mr. Khalifa," the judge warned. During recess, Melvin's PR team posted another live video. He sat hunched, shirt sleeves rolled, eyes swollen. "Look at me. I'm a broken man. My wife turned the world against me. She froze my accounts, humiliated me. Is this justice?" The video spread instantly. His supporters clung to it, hashtags rising, #justice for Melvin. But Juliet had been prepared. When the court resumed, Susan introduced a 2-minute compilation curated from their evidence. No commentary, just facts. A still photo of Juliet's bruises, a screenshot of the property deed with her name bold, a snippet of his voice note mocking women as easy to control, CCTV footage of his attempted break-in. The video ended with Juliet's calm face, walking into the office lobby while Melvin was escorted out. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge removed her glasses, eyes scanning the packed room. After reviewing all evidence, property deeds, financial records, witness testimony, and video documentation, this court rules in favor of Mrs. Juliet Faderson. Melvin's head dropped. All assets, including the marital home, company holdings and accounts are legally hers. Mr. Khalifa is stripped of all signatory rights. Furthermore, this court acknowledges a clear pattern of financial abuse and domestic violence. While criminal proceedings are still pending, today we finalize the transfer of full ownership to Mrs. Faderson. The gavel struck once, firm and final. Melvin tried to stand, to speak, but no words came. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, urging him down. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Juliet rose slowly, calm as stone. She didn't gloat. She simply gathered her files, nodded to Susan, and walked out. The reporters swarmed again. "Juliet, any words for the public?" She stopped briefly, her voice low but steady. "The truth speaks. Sometimes it just takes time." Then she moved past them, the sun cutting through the clouds as though the city itself had exhaled. Sandra joined her by the car, offering a faint smile. "It's only a matter of time now," Sandra said. "The fraud investigation will finish what the court started. He'll face prison." Juliet nodded, eyes forward. She didn't smile. There was still pain in her chest, but also peace. For the first time in years, her life was hers again. The night after the verdict, the Banana Island mansion was quiet. Not the heavy silence of loneliness Juliet Faderson had once known, but the kind of silence that felt earned. The kind of silence that meant peace. She stood on the balcony overlooking the lagoon, a mug of tea warming her palms, the city lights glittering in the distance. For the first time in years, she could breathe without feeling like she was waiting for someone else's permission. Her phone buzzed on the table. A flood of messages lit up the screen. Reporters, colleagues, even strangers. Most were apologies, some were praises, and others were confessions from women who had seen themselves in her story. Juliet scrolled briefly, then put the phone face down. She wasn't interested in becoming anyone's spectacle. She wanted to live, to rebuild. But fate had one more turn to make. 2 nights after the ruling, news broke. Melvin Khalifa had been arrested at a hotel in Lekki. Police confirmed he was caught attempting to move funds through offshore accounts using forged documents. The charges now went beyond fraud. They included money laundering, cybercrime, and attempted identity theft. Juliet read the report in silence. The man who had once laughed at her in public, who had once told her she was nothing without him, now stood in handcuffs while cameras captured his fall. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply whispered, "It's over." Sandra Cole called later that evening. "They've denied him bail. The investigation is airtight. With what we gave the authorities, he's not walking away this time." Juliet thanked her quietly. They had started as strangers bound by betrayal, but now Sandra felt like a comrade, a woman who had fought alongside her in a war neither of them had chosen. Weeks passed. The mansion felt lighter with Melvin's belongings gone. Juliet turned what used to be his study into a library. She hung soft curtains, filled the shelves with books, and placed a single orchid on the desk. It was no longer a room for scheming. It was hers now, for reading, dreaming, and breathing freely. Aunt Victoria visited often, carrying groceries, advice, and her steady presence. One afternoon, as they unpacked bags in the kitchen, she touched Juliet's hand. "You don't need to rush into rebuilding everything," she said. "You've already won." Juliet shook her head gently. "It isn't about winning. It's about not letting what he broke stay broken. For too long, I lived small. I won't anymore." Her aunt smiled. "That's my girl." One morning, Juliet received an invitation from a women's foundation. They wanted her to speak at their annual conference. Not about Melvin, but about survival, silence, and the strength to leave. She hesitated at first. She wasn't a public speaker, but something inside told her this was not about her anymore. It was about every woman who might be sitting in the shadows, waiting for a sign. On the day of the event, she wore a simple cream suit, her hair swept back. The hall was packed. Young women, older women, students, professionals. Cameras flashed, but Juliet focused only on the faces in the crowd. "No," she began softly. "If you're in a toxic relationship, leave. If you think marriage will change him, it won't. If he mocks you now, he'll mock you worse with a ring on your finger. If he hits you now, he'll hit you harder later. People will tell you to be patient, to sacrifice. But people won't save you. They'll gossip while you bleed. Save yourself because the dead tell no stories. The room was silent, then erupted into quiet, tearful applause. Juliet didn't linger. She nodded once and stepped down. It wasn't about being admired. It was about planting a seed of courage in someone else. Back at Playzone headquarters, change was already underway. Under Juliet's leadership, the company stabilized. She hired compliance officers, restructured accounts, and opened a mentorship program for women in tech. Investors who had once hesitated returned, impressed not by charisma, but by governance. Her first board meeting as CEO ended with a standing ovation from staff, not because she had promised glory, but because she had promised accountability. Later that evening, she stood in the office lobby alone. The same lobby where Melvin had once been dragged out, raging and humiliated. She placed her palm against the glass wall, watching the Lagos skyline shimmer. "We rebuilt," she whispered. Emails poured in from women across Nigeria and beyond. Some shared their own stories of abuse. Others simply said thank you. Juliet read them at night in her library, sometimes with tears in her eyes. One read, "I saw your video. I thought I was alone. But because of you, I packed my bags and left yesterday. You saved me." Juliet pressed her hand to her chest, breath catching. It was then she understood. Her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every woman who needed proof that silence could become strength, that survival could become strategy. Months later, Juliet stood again on the balcony of her mansion, the lagoon breeze lifting her hair. Aunt Victoria was inside, laughing with Sandra over tea. The two women had become unlikely friends, bonded not by tragedy, but by resilience. Juliet closed her eyes, listening to the laughter. It was the sweetest sound. Evidence that life moved on, that broken things could be mended. She thought about the girl she once was, curled on a bathroom floor after a party humiliation, believing she was powerless. She thought about the woman she was now, calm, steady, in control. Melvin Khalifa's name was still whispered in scandals, still dissected in blogs. But it no longer mattered. He was a ghost of her past, a cautionary tale. Juliet Faderson was alive, unbroken, and free. She lifted her tea toward the horizon, a private toast. "To silence," she murmured, "and to the strength it gave me." The city lights winked back like stars.